Ethan Cole was the kind of man everyone admired from a distance but feared up close. He was a rich and powerful CEO who had built his empire from nothing. Every newspaper called him a genius businessman, a visionary. But behind the sharp suits, luxury cars, and elegant mansion, Ethan was a man who trusted no one. His success had come at a cost: betrayal. Years ago, someone he cared for deeply had stolen from him and disappeared. Since then, his heart had turned cold, and he began to believe that everyone had a hidden agenda. His mansion, though grand and beautiful, was silent. No laughter, no warmth, only the soft ticking of a clock and the sound of his own footsteps. He spent his days in meetings, his nights reviewing contracts, and his weekends alone with expensive wine that never really tasted good anymore. Money could buy him everything except peace. That's when Lila came into his life. She was a new maid, recommended by one of his staff. When she first entered his home, Ethan barely noticed her. She was quiet, shy, and always kept her eyes down. She spoke only when necessary, never looked him in the eye, and worked tirelessly from dawn to dusk. She didn't seem to care about his status or his wealth, which made her different from most people he had met. But Ethan didn't believe in different anymore. In his mind, everyone eventually showed their true face: greedy, dishonest, or fake. After 2 months of watching her work silently, he began to wonder, could she really be that pure-hearted? Or was she just waiting for the right moment to take advantage? That thought began to bother him. He remembered how his last assistant had stolen confidential company files, how a close friend had used his trust for money. Ethan had learned the hard way that kindness often hides lies. So one cold night, an idea formed in his mind: a test. He wanted to see if Lila was truly honest, or just pretending like everyone else. He planned something unusual. After a long day at the office, he came home, loosened his tie, and sat down on the couch in the living room. The soft lights made the room glow warmly, and his phone and wallet lay carelessly on the table beside him. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and decided to pretend to fall asleep. His plan was simple. He wanted to see what she would do when she thought he was asleep. Would she touch his phone? Would she go through his wallet? Would she show the same kind of greed he'd seen before? Ethan was certain that no one could resist temptation forever. A few minutes later, he heard the faint sound of soft footsteps. It was Lila, carrying her small cleaning basket. Her steps were light, almost hesitant. She didn't know he was awake, but she could see him lying there, head tilted slightly, breathing slow and even. The room was silent except for the faint ticking of the wall clock. Ethan watched through half-open eyes as she stopped near him. His heart beat a little faster, not because he was afraid, but because he was waiting to be proven right, waiting to confirm what he had always believed about people. For a long moment, she just stood there, looking at him. Then her gaze moved toward the wallet and phone on the table. Ethan's muscles tensed slightly. This was the moment of truth. Would she reach for them? Would she check his phone or take even a small amount of cash? His heart grew colder as she slowly moved closer. But what happened next wasn't what he expected. Lila didn't touch the wallet. She didn't touch anything at all. Instead, she bent slightly and whispered something he almost couldn't hear. Her voice was soft, filled with a kind of tired compassion. "You work too much, sir," she murmured. Then she sighed, looked around, and continued cleaning quietly. Ethan felt confused. No one had ever spoken to him like that, not with fear or respect, but with simple concern. He didn't move, didn't open his eyes. He wanted to see more. He wanted to know what she would do next. After finishing the cleaning, Lila walked back toward him. For a moment, she hesitated again, looking at him with a sad expression. Then she took off the thin shawl she was wearing, the only thing keeping her warm in the cold evening, and gently placed it over his shoulders. The gesture was small, but it carried something Ethan hadn't felt in years: care. Real, honest care. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He almost opened his eyes right then but stopped himself. He wanted to hold onto that strange warmth for a little longer. When Lila quietly walked away, he could hear the door close softly behind her. The room was silent again, but it didn't feel empty anymore. He sat there for a long time, still pretending to sleep, though his mind was wide awake. Something about what had just happened bothered him, but not in a bad way. He couldn't understand why a maid, who had nothing, would give up her own comfort just to keep her boss warm. No one had done anything selfless for him in years. As the night grew darker, Ethan realized that maybe, just maybe, not everyone was the same. But he wasn't ready to believe that yet. He needed proof, real proof. Tomorrow, he would check the security cameras to make sure his eyes hadn't deceived him. For now, though, he sat there on the couch with the shawl around his shoulders, staring into the dim light, wondering if he had just witnessed something rare. A glimpse of genuine kindness in a world he thought was full of lies. And for the first time in a long while, Ethan didn't feel like the powerful CEO everyone feared. He just felt human. The next evening arrived quietly, just like any other night in Ethan Cole's mansion. The huge house stood surrounded by tall trees and bright garden lights, but inside, it felt empty and cold. Every room was neat, every floor shined, but there was no warmth, only silence. Ethan sat in his office, pretending to read some reports, but his mind was somewhere else. He couldn't stop thinking about what had happened the night before. Lila's soft whisper, her gentle action of covering him with her shawl. It played again and again in his mind like a movie. He wasn't sure if he had imagined it. Maybe she was just being polite. Maybe it was nothing. But the way she had looked at him, that sad, caring look, it felt different. Still, Ethan wasn't ready to believe in kindness again. He had seen too many people smile to his face and stab him behind his back. So he decided to repeat the test, to be completely sure about who Lila really was. That night, he left his office earlier than usual. The air outside was cool, and the faint sound of crickets filled the quiet. He loosened his tie and sat down again on the same couch in the living room, the same place where he had pretended to sleep the night before. On the table beside him, he placed his phone, wallet, and a small gold watch. All things that could tempt anyone who wasn't honest. Then he leaned back, closed his eyes halfway, and waited. The mansion's clock ticked softly, and the sound of distant footsteps echoed through the hall. Lila was finishing her chores for the evening. She had no idea that her boss was quietly watching her again. She moved gently from room to room, carrying a small bucket and a cloth. Her hands looked tired, and her steps were slow, but she never complained. Ethan could hear her humming softly, a sad, peaceful tune that reminded him of something distant, something from his childhood. The sound made the big, cold mansion feel strangely alive. When she finally entered the living room, she froze for a second, just like before. There he was again, lying on the couch, eyes closed, breathing slow and steady, looking as if he had fallen asleep after a long day of work. The light from the lamp cast a warm glow on his face. His phone and wallet were still there, easy to reach. Lila stood silently, not knowing what to do. She slowly put her cleaning basket down and walked toward the table. Ethan's heartbeat quickened. He could sense her presence, the quiet rustle of her clothes, the soft sound of her slippers on the marble floor. He kept his breathing even, pretending to be deep asleep. Lila stopped near the table. Her eyes fell on the wallet first. It looked thick, probably full of cash. Then on the phone, an expensive one shining under the soft light. Ethan waited. He told himself, this is it. If she's going to show her true colors, it will be now. But instead of reaching out, Lila sighed quietly and shook her head. He must be exhausted again, she whispered to herself. Her voice was gentle, full of worry, not greed. She didn't know that he could hear every word. He works so much, always alone. He never even eats dinner properly. Ethan felt something strange twist in his chest. He wasn't used to people caring about him. People usually cared about his money, not his well-being. Lila picked up the cleaning cloth and began wiping the glass table carefully so as not to disturb him. Every few seconds, she would glance at him with quiet concern. Her movements were soft and respectful, like someone cleaning a sacred place. When she finished, she stood still for a moment, looking around the room. Then, Noticing that the window was slightly open and a cold breeze was blowing in, she frowned. "He'll catch a cold like this," she muttered under her breath. She gently walked to the window and closed it, careful not to make a sound. Ethan was still pretending to sleep, but inside, his thoughts were racing. Why would she care? He wondered. What does she gain from this? He couldn't understand. Then, something unexpected happened. Lila quietly took off her small jacket, an old, worn piece of clothing that looked like it barely kept her warm, and gently laid it over him. "There," she whispered, smiling faintly. "At least now you won't be cold." Ethan almost opened his eyes right then. His throat tightened, and for the first time in years he felt guilt. Guilt for suspecting someone so kind, guilt for thinking the worst of her. But he stayed still, letting her believe he was asleep. When Lila finished tidying up, she gathered her things. Before leaving the room, she turned back one last time. For a moment, she just looked at him. Her eyes seemed full of sadness, like she wanted to say something but couldn't. Then she whispered, "You remind me of my father. He used to work himself to exhaustion too." Her voice broke slightly at the end. She quickly turned away and walked out of the room. The sound of her footsteps faded down the hallway, and then the house was silent again. Ethan slowly opened his eyes. The jacket she had placed on him was light, but it felt like the warmest thing he had ever worn. He stared at the ceiling, lost in thought. The cold, skeptical CEO inside him was slowly beginning to crumble. He didn't know Lila's full story, but he could feel that there was pain behind her quietness, strength behind her silence. She wasn't like the others. Ethan stayed awake for a long time that night. The room around him looked the same, but something inside him had changed. For the first time in many years, he didn't feel completely alone. Someone, even for a brief moment, had cared, not because of his money or position, but simply because she had a kind heart. And as he sat there, still feeling the warmth of her jacket, Ethan made a silent promise to himself. He would find out more about her, who she really was, and what struggles she carried behind that shy smile. He needed to understand this woman who had reminded him that kindness still existed. He didn't know it yet, but this small, quiet act of care would soon change both their lives forever. The morning after that quiet night, Ethan woke up early, long before the sun rose. But even though his body was awake, his mind was far away. He sat in silence, replaying the moment when Lila had gently placed her jacket over him. That simple act of kindness had shaken something deep inside him. For years, Ethan had built walls around his heart, telling himself that kindness was fake and people only cared when they had something to gain. But now he was beginning to doubt his own beliefs. He walked to his study, poured himself a cup of coffee, and sat down in front of the security monitor. He had installed cameras all around the house, not because he was paranoid, but because experience had taught him that trust could be dangerous. He wanted to see for himself what had really happened the previous night. Maybe he had misunderstood. Maybe Lila had done something he hadn't noticed. He pressed play. The footage began. The camera showed the living room, quiet and dimly lit. Then Lila appeared, just like he remembered, holding her small cleaning basket, walking carefully so she wouldn't make noise. He watched as she froze for a moment, looking at him lying there. Then he saw everything clearly. How she had looked at his wallet but didn't touch it. How she had whispered softly to herself. And finally, how she had taken off her jacket and placed it over him before walking away. Ethan leaned back in his chair, speechless. He watched the scene again just to be sure. There was no trick, no hidden motive. She really had done it out of care. A woman who barely earned enough to feed herself had chosen to give up her own warmth for him. A man who already had everything. The thought hit him hard. Later that morning, when Lila came to work, she greeted him politely as usual. "Good morning, sir," she said in her soft voice, not knowing that he had spent the entire night thinking about her. Ethan looked at her closely for the first time, really looked. Her uniform was clean but old, her shoes were worn, and her hands had small cuts from constant cleaning. She didn't wear makeup or jewelry. She looked tired, but there was a calm strength in her eyes. "Good morning," he replied quietly. It was the first time he had spoken to her without his usual cold tone. Lila gave a small, surprised nod and went back to her work. The rest of the day, Ethan found it hard to focus on his meetings. His mind kept wandering back to Lila. Why was she working so hard? Why did someone like her, so kind and gentle, have to struggle like this? He had a feeling there was more to her story than what he saw. That evening, while leaving for a meeting, he noticed something from his car window. Lila was outside the mansion gate, waiting for a small bus. The streetlights flickered weakly, and the wind was cold. She held a small paper bag close to her chest. He could tell it was food, maybe dinner for her family. Her thin shawl was wrapped tightly around her shoulders, the same one she had taken off for him the night before. Ethan sat silently in his car, watching her disappear into the night. Something inside him felt heavy. He had lived his life surrounded by luxury, but this woman, who had nothing, had shown him more humanity in one act than he had seen in years. Meanwhile, Lila returned to her small rented apartment in a poor neighborhood on the city's edge. The building was old, the paint was peeling, and the rooms were cold. Her mother lay on a thin mattress, pale and weak. Lila smiled softly and placed the paper bag beside her. "I brought soup, Mama," she said gently. Her mother tried to smile back. "You didn't have to, my dear. You should eat too." "I already did," Lila lied. She hadn't eaten since morning, but she didn't want her mother to worry. After making sure her mother took the medicine, she went to check on her younger brother, Daniel. He was sitting in a corner, working on an old school book. "Did you do your homework?" she asked. Daniel nodded, smiling. "Yes, Lila. One day I'll get a good job and take care of you and Mama." Her eyes filled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away. "That's my brave boy," she whispered. When they all went to sleep later, Lila sat by the window, staring at the stars. Her mind wandered to her boss, Mr. Ethan. She didn't know why, but she felt a strange sadness when she thought about him. He looked so lonely, even in his huge house. Maybe people like him have everything, she thought, but still feel empty inside. Back in his mansion, Ethan sat in his dark study, thinking the same thing, but about her. He couldn't understand why someone like Lila would work so hard and still find it in her heart to care for others. Most people in her position would complain, steal, or quit, but she never did. He remembered her whisper from the night before, about how he worked too much. No one had said something like that to him since his mother died years ago. For the first time in a long time, he felt like someone saw him not as a CEO, but as a person. The next morning, Ethan decided to do something he had never done before. He asked his driver to find out more about Lila. Not because he wanted to invade her privacy, but because he wanted to understand her life. He needed to know what kind of person could still be kind after facing so much hardship. That day, while Lila quietly dusted the shelves and wiped the marble floors, she had no idea her boss was slowly beginning to see her differently. To her, he was still the distant, serious man who lived behind glass walls of wealth and silence. But to Ethan, she was becoming a mystery he wanted to solve. A reminder that maybe not everyone in this world was selfish. As evening came again, Ethan found himself waiting for her cleaning routine to begin, just like before. The sound of her soft footsteps, the quiet hum of her song, they somehow brought a strange peace to the mansion. He didn't know it yet, but the test he had started out of suspicion was slowly turning into something else. Something that would open his heart in ways he never expected. The next morning, Ethan Cole sat in his office with his coffee turning cold on the desk. His mind wasn't focused on his company or the reports lying in front of him. Instead, he kept thinking about Lila, the shy maid who had quietly changed the way he saw people. He couldn't get her face out of his mind, the way she worked silently, the tired look in her eyes, and the kindness that came so naturally to her. He wanted to know more about her, to understand who she really was. He called his assistant, Mr. Grant, into the room. "I need you to find some information for me," Ethan said. His voice was calm but serious. Mr. Grant nodded quickly. "Of course, sir." "About what?" "About Lila," Ethan replied. "The maid who works here. I want to know everything. Where she lives, her background, her family. But do it quietly. Don't let her know. Mr. Grant looked a bit surprised. It wasn't every day that the boss asked for information about a maid. Yes, sir. I'll handle it, he said before leaving the room. As the day went on, Ethan tried to focus on his meetings, but his mind kept drifting back. He remembered her words, her whisper that night. You work too much. It had felt so genuine. He had spent years surrounded by people who only cared about his position, his money, or his signature. No one ever cared about him as a human being. By evening, Mr. Grant returned with a file in his hand. I found what you asked for, sir, he said, placing the folder on Ethan's desk. Ethan opened it slowly and began reading. Lila Rose, 27 years old. No husband. Lives with her sick mother and younger brother in the lower part of the city. Works 2 jobs. Cleaning at Ethan's mansion during the day and at a small diner at night. The report mentioned that her mother had been bedridden for almost 2 years after a stroke, and that her brother was still in school. They survived on Lila's small income, barely enough to pay rent and buy medicine. Ethan's chest tightened as he read each line. He had assumed she was just another worker trying to make a living. But now he realized she was carrying a weight far heavier than anyone should. He kept reading. Her late father had once been a teacher but passed away when she was young. And from that day, Lila had taken responsibility for the entire family. When he reached the last page, Ethan just sat there in silence. For years, he had thought that wealth protected him from the world. That money gave him power, safety, and distance from pain. But here was a woman who had nothing, yet carried herself with quiet dignity and honesty. That night, as he sat in the empty living room, the same room where he had once pretended to sleep, he thought deeply about everything. He could still remember her soft voice, her gentle hands arranging the room, and how she had given him her jacket without expecting anything in return. The more he thought about it, the more he felt ashamed. He had tested her as if she were some criminal, expecting her to fail. But she had passed his test in the most beautiful way possible, with kindness. At that same hour, miles away, Lila sat by her mother's bedside in their small apartment. The lights flickered weakly, and the smell of medicine filled the air. Her mother tried to speak, but her voice was weak. Lila, you look tired, my dear. You should rest. Lila smiled softly. I'll rest soon, Mama. Don't worry. She covered her mother with a blanket and then sat down near the window. She could hear the sounds of the city outside, cars, voices, and the faint noise of music from a neighbor's radio. She closed her eyes for a moment, thinking about her boss. She didn't know why she thought about him, but she did. He looked so lonely, she whispered to herself. People with everything often have nothing inside. The next morning, when she arrived at the mansion, she was surprised to see Ethan already awake and sitting in the garden. He rarely spent time outside. He was always buried in his work. She hesitated, unsure if she should disturb him. But he looked up and said, "Good morning, Lila." She froze for a second. It was the first time he had spoken her name. "Good morning, sir," she replied softly, keeping her eyes down. "You're here early," Ethan said, sipping his coffee. "Yes, sir," she said. "I wanted to clean the hall before the guests arrive later." He nodded but kept watching her. There was something about her presence that brought a strange calmness to him. She didn't know that he already knew about her life, about her sick mother and struggling family. He wanted to help her, but he didn't know how to do it without making her uncomfortable. Later that day, Ethan called Mr. Grant again. "Find the hospital where Lila's mother is treated," he said. "And make sure her bills are paid quietly. I don't want her to know it came from me." Mr. Grant nodded but couldn't hide his curiosity. "Sir, may I ask why?" Ethan looked out the window, his voice calm but heavy with emotion. "Because some people deserve kindness even when they don't ask for it." That evening, Lila received a call from the hospital. The nurse told her that her mother's treatment bills had been cleared and that they could now proceed with better medication. Lila was stunned. "What? That can't be right," she said. "I didn't pay anything yet." "The bill is taken care of," the nurse said gently. "Someone covered it anonymously." Lila hung up, tears filling her eyes. She had no idea who could have done such a thing. For the first time in months, she felt relief. She looked up at the ceiling and whispered, "Thank you, whoever you are." Back in his mansion, Ethan stood by the window watching the night sky. He didn't expect thanks or recognition. He just felt peaceful. It had been a long time since doing something for someone had made him feel human again. He didn't know that this small act of kindness would bring him even closer to the woman who had unknowingly taught him the meaning of compassion. What started as a test had now become a turning point. Not for her, but for him. Ethan, the cold CEO who once distrusted everyone, was beginning to rediscover his heart. And though neither of them knew it yet, fate was quietly weaving their lives together. Two souls from different worlds connected by one simple act of kindness. The sun had just started to rise when Lila reached the mansion for work. The sky was painted in soft shades of orange and gold, and the morning air felt cool against her skin. She smiled faintly as she walked through the gate, not knowing that something extraordinary had happened in her life the night before. She was still thinking about the hospital's call, the mysterious voice that told her her mother's bills had been paid. She had barely slept, her mind filled with questions. Who could have done such a thing for her family? As she entered the mansion, she found Ethan sitting at the dining table, reading the newspaper. He looked calm as always, dressed neatly in a crisp shirt, his expression serious. "Good morning, sir," she greeted politely, trying to hide her nervousness. Ethan looked up and gave a small smile. "Good morning, Lila." She nodded, quickly moving toward the kitchen to start her work. Ethan watched her for a moment before returning to his paper. He had spent the whole night wondering how she would react when she found out her mother's treatment had been taken care of. He had told the hospital to keep his identity secret, but part of him wanted to see her smile. That genuine, heartwarming smile she always gave when talking about her family. Throughout the morning, Lila seemed distracted. She accidentally dropped a glass, something she never did before. Ethan noticed her hands trembling slightly. "Is everything all right?" he asked gently. Lila looked startled. "Yes, sir. I'm fine. I just didn't sleep much." Ethan tilted his head. "Is your mother okay?" Her eyes widened. "She's actually better," she said, her voice shaking. "The hospital called last night. They said someone paid for her bills." Ethan acted surprised, keeping his expression calm. "Really? That's good news." "Yes, sir," she said softly, her eyes bright with emotion. "I just don't understand who would do something like that. We don't have any relatives left, and I haven't told anyone about our situation. I thought maybe it was a mistake." "Sometimes," Ethan said quietly, folding the newspaper, "good things happen when we least expect them." Lila smiled faintly. "Maybe God finally heard my prayers." Ethan looked at her for a moment and then turned away, hiding the softness in his eyes. "Maybe he did," he said under his breath. That day, Ethan found himself unable to concentrate on his work. He kept thinking about how fragile yet strong Lila looked. Her story had touched him deeply. She had faced so much pain and still managed to be kind, gentle, and hardworking. He had spent years surrounded by wealthy people who were never satisfied. Yet here was a woman who had so little and still gave so much. Later that afternoon, Ethan asked his assistant to bring him some documents. "Mr. Grant," he said, "how long has Lila been working here?" "About 3 months, sir," Grant replied. "She's never taken a day off. Everyone says she's polite and reliable." Ethan nodded slowly. "Make sure her salary is increased starting this month. Double it, and add a small bonus." Grant looked surprised again. "Double, sir? That's quite a raise for a maid." "She deserves it," Ethan said firmly. "And don't mention that I ordered it. Just tell her it's because of her excellent service." That evening, when Lila was about to leave, the accountant stopped her. "Lila, there's been an update to your salary," he said with a smile. "You'll be receiving double from now on. Mr. Cole appreciates your work." Lila stood frozen, holding her small bag. "Double? There must be a mistake." "No mistake," the accountant replied. "You've earned it." Tears filled her eyes. "Please thank Mr. Cole for me," she whispered. When she left the mansion that night, her heart was full. She looked up at the sky, the stars twinkling faintly above. Maybe it really is a miracle, she said softly. Meanwhile, Ethan stood by his office window, watching her walk down the path toward the gate. He saw her stop for a moment to tie her shawl tighter around her shoulders and smile up at the stars. That smile made him feel something warm and strange, something he hadn't felt in a long time. The next morning, Lila brought fresh flowers and placed them on the table near the living room. "You can have these, sir," she said shyly when Ethan noticed. "They're from my garden. Just small ones." Ethan looked at the flowers. Simple, white daisies and a few pink roses, and smiled. "They're beautiful. Thank you, Lila." She blushed slightly. "You're welcome, sir." The small act touched him deeply. She didn't have much, yet she still wanted to give something. That was who she was, someone who found joy in giving, even when she had so little to give. Over the next few days, Ethan found himself watching her more closely. He noticed how carefully she cleaned, how she treated every item in the house as if it were precious. He noticed how she helped the older gardener carry tools, how she fed the stray cats that came near the gate, and how she smiled at everyone she met, no matter how tired she looked. Every act of kindness from her made him question the way he had been living. For years, he had believed that success was everything, that money could fill the emptiness inside him. But now, he began to realize that what he truly missed was connection. One afternoon, when Lila was polishing the shelves, she accidentally dropped a family photo frame. The glass cracked slightly, but the photo inside, a young Ethan with his late parents, was safe. She quickly picked it up, looking frightened. "I'm so sorry, sir. I didn't mean to." Ethan interrupted her gently. "It's all right. No harm done." Her eyes widened in surprise. She had expected him to be angry, but instead he smiled softly. "That photo means a lot to me," he said quietly. "It's the only picture I have with my parents." Lila looked at the photo carefully. "You were very happy here," she said softly. "You should keep smiling like that, sir. It suits you." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. No one had ever spoken to him like that. So honestly, so kindly. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. "Thank you," he whispered finally. That night, after she left, Ethan looked at that photo again. He saw his younger self, carefree, hopeful, smiling with real joy. Somewhere along the way, that smile had disappeared. But now, because of one honest, kind maid, he felt like he could find it again. Lila didn't know it, but she had already begun to heal something broken inside Ethan's heart. And for the first time in many years, the cold, silent mansion didn't feel empty anymore. It felt alive, filled with the quiet warmth of gratitude and the first flicker of hope. Days passed quietly in the mansion, and something had changed between Ethan and Lila. It wasn't spoken, but it was felt. A gentle respect, a soft connection that grew with every passing day. Ethan found himself looking forward to the mornings, just to see her walk in with that calm smile. She didn't know it, but she had brought warmth into a house that had felt like an empty shell for years. One morning, Ethan woke up earlier than usual. He sat by the window with a cup of coffee, watching the sunlight pour through the trees. For years, his mornings had started with emails and phone calls, but now he just sat quietly, thinking. He remembered the first time he had tested her, pretending to sleep to see if she'd steal from him. The memory made him smile bitterly. How foolish he had been. He had doubted someone whose heart was far purer than most people he knew. When Lila arrived that morning, she was carrying a small lunchbox. "Good morning, sir," she greeted softly. "Good morning, Lila," Ethan replied. "What's in the box?" She looked shy. "Just some food I made for my mother. I was thinking, maybe you'd like to try some? It's not fancy, but it's from the heart." Ethan looked surprised, then smiled warmly. "I'd love to." At lunchtime, she brought out the small meal she'd prepared, simple rice, lentils, and vegetables. Ethan tasted it carefully. It wasn't something a billionaire would normally eat, but it was the most comforting food he'd had in years. "This is delicious," he said sincerely. Lila's eyes lit up. "Really? I was worried you wouldn't like it. It's just poor people's food. He shook his head. No, it's honest food, cooked with care. That makes all the difference. She smiled softly, looking down to hide her blush. That day, Ethan didn't go to his office. Instead, he sat in the garden while Lila watered the plants. He watched how gentle she was with everything. Even the smallest flower got her attention. When she noticed him sitting there, she smiled. "You're not working today, sir?" "I am," he said playfully. "I'm studying how to take care of plants." She laughed quietly, a sound so light and pure that it made his heart feel lighter too. "Would you like to try?" she asked, holding out the watering can. Ethan hesitated, then stood up and took it from her. He had never done something so ordinary in his life. The cold water spilled a little on his hands, and Lila giggled. "Careful, sir," she said softly. For a while, they worked side by side in peaceful silence. The garden was filled with birds, the scent of flowers, and the sound of water. It felt like a different world, one far away from money, pressure, and expectations. Ethan felt alive again. Later that evening, when Lila was about to leave, she turned back to him. "Sir," she said, "thank you for everything you've done for me and my mother." Ethan froze slightly. "You know," she nodded. "The hospital told me the truth today. They said it was you who paid the bills." Her voice trembled as she spoke. "Why would you do that for me? I'm just your maid." Ethan looked at her gently. "Because you're not just a maid, Lila. You're a good person. You work hard, you care about others, and you deserve help. I've spent my life surrounded by people who only care about money. But you reminded me that kindness still exists." Tears welled up in her eyes. "You didn't have to do that, sir. You've already done so much." Ethan smiled faintly. "Sometimes, helping someone else helps you too." Lila wiped her eyes quickly. "I don't know how to thank you." "Just keep smiling," he said softly. "That's enough." The silence that followed was warm and filled with unspoken feelings. For a moment, they both stood there, two souls from completely different worlds, yet somehow connected by compassion. After Lila left, Ethan sat by the fireplace, lost in thought. For the first time in years, he felt proud, not of his wealth or power, but of the person he was becoming. Lila's presence had changed him in ways he never expected. The next few days, their bond grew stronger. They spoke more, not just about work, but about life. Lila shared stories about her childhood, her dreams, and how she always believed kindness would return one day. Ethan told her about his late parents, about how he used to love painting but gave it up when business took over his life. One evening, Lila found an old canvas in the storeroom. "You painted this?" she asked, brushing off the dust. Ethan nodded. "A long time ago." "It's beautiful," she said. "You should paint again." He chuckled softly. "Maybe I will, if you promise to be my first critic." She smiled. "Deal." As days turned into weeks, the mansion began to feel alive again. Laughter, once a stranger to those halls, had returned. The staff noticed how their boss seemed happier, calmer, even kinder. No one knew why, but Lila did. One evening, heavy rain started to pour. Lila was about to leave when thunder roared loudly, and she hesitated near the door. Ethan noticed. "You can stay until it stops," he offered. "But sir, No argument," he said gently. "You'll get soaked out there." She nodded gratefully. As the rain lashed against the windows, they sat across from each other in the living room. He made her tea, and they talked softly about life, fate, and how strange it was that two completely different lives had crossed paths. When the power went out for a moment, Lila laughed nervously. "I hate thunder," she admitted. Ethan smiled. "You're safe here." For the first time, Lila looked into his eyes, really looked, and she saw not a rich, powerful man, but a lonely heart trying to find warmth. Ethan felt that look too, and it stirred something deep inside him. When the lights came back on, both quickly looked away, pretending nothing had happened. But they both knew something had changed between them. That night, as Ethan lay in bed, he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about her. The sound of her laughter, the gentleness in her voice, the strength in her eyes. He realized that the test he had started long ago had ended in a way he never expected. He had wanted to test her heart. But in the end, it was his own heart that had been tested, and changed forever. The next morning, the mansion felt unusually quiet. Rain had washed the gardens clean, and the air smelled fresh and new. Lila arrived early, as she always did, but something inside her felt different. The memory of last night, sitting with Ethan during the storm, talking like old friends, kept replaying in her mind. She wasn't sure what it meant, but she knew one thing. She no longer saw him as just her boss. Ethan, on the other hand, had barely slept. He had spent the night thinking about her. Her honesty, her kindness, and the peace she brought into his life. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about meetings or profits. He was thinking about a simple girl who had taught him what true goodness looked like. But deep inside, he was afraid. He was a CEO, a man of status and wealth, and she was just a maid. What would people think? Could two worlds so different really come together? That day, Ethan stayed home instead of going to the office. He wanted to see her, to talk to her again. Lila, unaware of his thoughts, continued her chores as usual, humming softly to herself while dusting the living room. Ethan stood at the doorway, watching her for a while before speaking. "You always hum that same tune," he said with a smile. She turned, a little startled. "Oh, I didn't realize you were there, sir. It's an old song my mother used to sing. It's peaceful," he said softly. "Makes the house feel alive." Lila blushed a little, smiling shyly. "Thank you, sir." Ethan hesitated for a moment, then said, "Lila, would you like to join me for breakfast today? I'd appreciate the company." Her eyes widened in surprise. "Oh, sir, I couldn't. I'm just the maid. I insist." Ethan interrupted gently. "Please, it's just breakfast." After a moment of hesitation, she nodded. "All right, sir." They sat across from each other at the long dining table. For a moment, Lila felt nervous. The elegant room, the silver dishes, the expensive china. She had never imagined sitting at the same table as her employer. But Ethan made her feel at ease. He asked about her mother, her childhood, her favorite foods. Slowly, her shyness faded, replaced by warmth and laughter. When she told him about how she used to help her mother sell homemade bread at the market, Ethan smiled. "Maybe you should teach me to bake someday," he said playfully. She laughed softly. "You? A CEO in the kitchen?" He chuckled. "I'm serious. I could use a new skill." That small moment, the laughter, the shared warmth, made the house feel like home. Even the staff passing by noticed the unusual sight. Their serious, quiet boss smiling genuinely for the first time in years. Later that day, Ethan's business partner, Richard, arrived unexpectedly. He was loud, confident, and very different from Ethan. As he entered, he saw Lila arranging flowers near the hallway. "Who's that?" he asked. Ethan replied calmly, "That's Lila, my maid." Richard smirked. "She's interesting. You've got good taste in staff." Ethan frowned slightly at his tone. "She's a good worker and a good person. Show some respect." Richard laughed it off, but Ethan's voice was firm. "I mean it." Lila heard the exchange and felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment. She quickly left the room, pretending not to hear. Ethan noticed and sighed. He didn't like the way Richard had looked at her, or the way it had made her uncomfortable. After Richard left, Ethan went to find Lila. She was in the garden, clipping some flowers quietly. "Hey," he said softly. "Are you all right?" She nodded without looking up. "Yes, sir. I just don't like being talked about like that." "I understand," Ethan said. "You didn't deserve that." Lila looked at him then, her eyes sad. "People like him will always think I'm less because I clean floors. It doesn't matter how hard I work." Ethan felt something twist inside his chest. "You're wrong," he said gently. "The work you do, the kindness you show, that's worth more than anything money can buy. Don't let people like Richard make you forget that." Her eyes softened. "You really think so?" "I know so," he replied firmly. There was silence again, the kind that said everything words couldn't. As days passed, Ethan began to notice how his feelings for Lila had grown deeper than he ever expected. He found himself thinking about her at work, missing her laughter when she wasn't around. It scared him, not because he didn't understand it, but because he did. He had fallen for her. One evening, while he was painting in his study, something he had started again because of her, Lila came in quietly. She watched him for a moment, admiring how calm he looked. "You paint beautifully, sir," she said softly. He smiled. "You gave me the courage to start again." She walked closer to look at the painting, a picture of the mansion's garden under the morning sun. "It's so peaceful," she whispered. Ethan turned to her. "Lila," he said, his voice quiet but sincere, "you've changed this house. You've changed me." She looked confused. "I don't understand. When I first hired you, I was a man who trusted no one. I tested you because I thought everyone had a hidden motive. But you proved me wrong. You taught me that honesty and kindness still exist. You reminded me how to live again." Her heart raced as she listened. She didn't know what to say. Ethan continued, his eyes gentle. "You're more than just an employee to me, Lila. You're someone I deeply respect." Lila looked down, her cheeks warm, her heart pounding. "You've been so kind to me, sir. I'll never forget what you've done for my family." He wanted to tell her the truth, that it wasn't kindness anymore. It was love. But he stopped himself. He didn't want to scare her. He didn't want her to feel pressured or confused. Instead, he smiled softly. "You deserve all the happiness in the world." Lila nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "So do you, sir." When she left the room, Ethan stood by the window, looking out at the stars. For years, he had built walls around his heart, thinking money could protect him from pain. But now, those walls were gone. All because of a maid with a gentle smile and a heart full of light. And though he didn't say it out loud, one truth echoed in his heart. He wasn't just grateful for her presence. He was falling in love with her. That night, both of them lay awake in their separate rooms, thinking of each other, wondering what fate had planned next. Neither of them knew it yet, but their bond was about to be tested one last time, in a way that would reveal just how strong their hearts truly were. The next morning began like any other, but there was a quiet heaviness in the air that neither Ethan nor Lila could explain. Lila arrived early as usual, her apron neatly tied, her hair pulled back in a braid. She greeted Ethan with her usual polite smile, but something about his expression told her that today wasn't ordinary. He looked thoughtful, almost troubled. "Good morning, sir," she said softly. "Good morning, Lila," he replied, but his voice was distant. She noticed he had barely touched his breakfast, and the cup of coffee beside him had gone cold. "Is something wrong?" she asked carefully. Ethan looked up, hesitated, then sighed. "There's something I need to tell you." Her heart skipped a beat. "About what, sir?" He paused for a long time before speaking. "I've been offered a new business deal overseas. It's a long-term project. If I accept, I'll have to leave the country for at least a year." Lila froze. "A year?" He nodded slowly. "Maybe longer." The words hit her harder than she expected. She forced a smile, even though her chest felt tight. "That's wonderful, sir. Congratulations." Ethan looked at her carefully. "You don't seem happy." "I am," she said quickly, looking away. "You deserve it." But her voice trembled slightly, and he could hear the sadness behind her words. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them felt heavier than ever before. Later that day, Lila tried to focus on her work, but her mind kept drifting. The thought of the mansion without Ethan, without his calm voice, his quiet smile, the warmth he had brought back into her life, felt unbearable. She told herself it was just attachment, just gratitude. But deep inside, she knew it was more than that. She had fallen in love with him. Ethan, too, couldn't concentrate. Every corner of the mansion reminded him of her. Her laughter in the kitchen, her humming while cleaning, her kindness in every small thing she did. The idea of leaving felt wrong, empty. Yet he also knew that staying without telling her how he felt would be even worse. That evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan called her to the garden. The sky was painted in shades of gold and pink, and a soft breeze moved through the flowers. Lila walked toward him nervously, wiping her hands on her apron. "You wanted to see me, sir?" she asked. "Yes," Ethan said quietly. "I didn't want to leave things unsaid." She frowned slightly, confused. "What do you mean?" He looked at her, his eyes full of emotions he could no longer hide. "Lila, when you came here, I didn't trust anyone. I thought kindness was weakness. I even pretended to sleep just to test you, to see if you'd take advantage of me. But you showed me something I'd forgotten. Humanity, compassion, honesty." Her eyes widened as she listened. "You made me realize that wealth means nothing if there's no warmth in life," he continued. "You've changed me, Lila, in ways I can't even explain." Lila felt her heart racing. "Sir, I don't know what to say." He stepped closer, his voice soft. "You don't have to say anything. I just need you to know that you're special to me, more than I ever thought possible." For a moment, everything was still, the world seemed to pause. Lila blinked back tears, her voice trembling. "You've been kind to me, sir, more than anyone ever has. You helped my mother, you treated me with respect, and you gave me a reason to believe in good people again. But you're a CEO, and you're not just anything," he interrupted gently. "You're the strongest person I've met." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "Even if I wanted to say what I feel, it wouldn't be right." Ethan's eyes softened. Sometimes the heart doesn't care about what's right or wrong. It just knows what feels true. She looked at him, her emotions torn between love and fear. For the first time, she let her feelings show. "You changed my life, sir. But even if you go away, I'll keep praying for you. Because that's what love is. Wishing happiness for someone, even if they're far away." Ethan felt his throat tighten. "And I'll carry your kindness with me wherever I go," he said softly. They stood there for a while, saying nothing, as the last light of sunset faded behind the trees. It was one of those moments where words weren't needed. Their hearts spoke for them. A few days later, Ethan prepared to leave for his business trip. The entire staff gathered to wish him farewell, but his eyes searched for only one person. Lila stood at the back, holding a small envelope in her hands. When the others left, she walked up to him slowly. "This is for you, sir," she said, handing him the envelope. "Just something small." He opened it to find a simple card with a hand-drawn flower on the front. Inside, she had written, "Thank you for changing my life. Wherever you go, may kindness follow you." Ethan smiled, his heart heavy. "I'll treasure this, Lila." As he turned to leave, she whispered, "Take care of yourself, sir." He looked back one last time and said quietly, "You too, Lila." Months passed. Ethan was busy with meetings and business abroad, but no amount of success could fill the emptiness he felt. Every night, when the world went quiet, he thought about her laughter, her humility, her pure heart. He realized that no wealth, no success, could replace what she had given him: peace. Back at the mansion, Lila continued her work. The place felt emptier, but she kept everything just as he liked it. Sometimes, she'd sit in the garden where they used to talk, remembering his words and his gentle smile. Then, one day, almost a year later, a black car stopped in front of the mansion. The staff rushed to the gate, surprised. Lila looked up from the garden and froze. Ethan stepped out, smiling softly. He looked different, more relaxed, more alive. "Sir, you're back?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I told you I wouldn't forget," he said, walking toward her. "I realized that home isn't a place, Lila. It's a person, and I already found mine." Lila's eyes filled with tears as he smiled gently. "I came back because some things are worth more than any business deal," he said quietly. For the first time, she couldn't hold back her tears, and as the soft breeze moved through the garden, the two of them stood there. No longer a CEO and a maid, but two souls who had found something pure and rare. Love that was honest, humble, and true. And from that day on, the mansion was never silent again. It was filled with laughter, warmth, and the quiet joy of two hearts that had finally found their way home.